we are never truly lost. Well, okay, sure, maybe we get turned around for a few days in the woods, where life just feels like it's getting the best of us, and everything's going wrong. And I'm Mike Martin, and I've stood right where you're standing, lost, beaten down, like nothing's ever gonna change. And that's why I built this camp. And that's why I'm inviting you to join me and all the members of this wild community. Because you know what, friend? It does get better. So come along with me into the wild and let me show you this awesome, unique skill set that lays within inside of you. With help from the land, we're gonna unlock the steward that's inside each and every one of us that will lead the way out of the darkness and into healing. Here at the Camp of Healing on Project Mindfully Outdoors.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back in to camp and welcome to Project Mindfully Outdoors, the podcast. As always, I'm your host and your guide into all things wilderness meditation, Mike Martin. So recently, there's been a lot of talk around camp that spun around self-talk in relation to the idea of living the hero's journey, which is why today I've chosen to return back to that rainy day in early July for this episode, because during that wet and interesting afternoon, I had a chance to speak with a true hero, Ben Monnette. We shared a conversation that takes the hero's journey to a very pivotal point. That moment right after facing the defeat that started the reason you're beginning this journey. You know that point where everything is horribly bad and we gotta cope with things, and instead of choosing something healthy, we put a mask over it and we decide to just cover up and pretend like it's not there. Well, listen, our talk explores our lives' journeys of climbing back when we decided to put a mask on and go south instead of looking north. Not only did we talk in depth about how that struggle felt, but we also explore and celebrate the road that we had to travel in order to rediscover the compass that helped us to look north again. I want to leave things right here so that we can pay the bills, because I know I just hit a spot and I got your attention for a conversation that I know for a fact you need to hear. So I really hope you enjoy my conversation with my guest today, Ben Monnette, and we'll see you on the flip side. Alright, this portion of Project Mindfully Outdoors is brought to you by our good friends at Blackbeard Fire Starters. You know, I put these things to use every single day, it seems like, whether it's at a meditative fire for the podcast or for an event, but I also use them all the time when I'm in the field. You know, I put them up to the test in every environment, in every situation, and they've never let me down. So swing over to blackbeardfirestarters.com/mindfully and check out the full line of Blackbeard fire starters. While you're there, tell them I sent you by using promo code MINDFUL and save yourself 10%. That's fire starters or blackbeardfirestarters.com, promo code MINDFUL.
All right, Ben, thanks for taking the time to sit down and have this conversation with me. Before we dive into anything, I want to thank you for your service, first and foremost. I mean, you've been around the world, you've dealt with a lot of traumatic experiences, and then you've had to come back into, the everyday way of life. And I know that's challenging. I've experienced it on a different context, and, we have our ups and downs with it. Sometimes we form healthy habits and stick with us in the process. Other times we end up, unfortunately, latching on to less healthy coping mechanisms. And I want to talk about bridging the gap from understanding that, this was the old chapter of my life. I can redefine who I am now and reintegrate and build on a new chapter in a healthy way, but yet still make headway in touch on how some of those more unhealthy coping mechanisms can interfere with that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have me as a guest. It's an honor. And I look forward to kind of discussing through, that transition, right? You mentioned, coming back and, from deployments, I've had eight deployments to the Middle East. And each time it, although very similar, there was a little bit of differences to them depending on how traumatic those deployments were. But each time my unhealthy behavior of coping with those, with alcohol continued to get more and more and more. And it was an unhealthy habit. However, at that time, that was a habit that I ingrained in myself that was the only fix. I was able to fool myself enough to say this was how I coped with that, and it was okay to cope like that. And especially with alcohol, it has numerous amounts of side effects with depression and anxiety, and reintegrating into society had some life or stressors with that. But then you incorporate a depressant, and you have the depression tackled on top of that. It just continued to spiral downward to some very dark and negative thoughts. However, I didn't have the skills or the understanding to address those life stressors in a healthy way, just like you were talking about.
I think right there at the end, you hit the nail on the head. Whether it's coming back from deployment or it's just, the everyday walk of life. I feel like a lot of us have been almost don't end up getting taught those skills that are going to help us to bridge the gap to, stay on a healthy course. And it ends up leaving us in this position where we feel like we're alone. We feel like we're lost. And most importantly of all, we develop this fear of being vulnerable. And all of those things, when you put them together, it becomes like the perfect mixing pot to craft this mask that is essentially addiction. We're hiding from all of these things that we're lacking. And it may not be so much just this is exactly what I want to do with my life. Nobody says I want to grow up or go forward and be an addict. But
it's just easier at times. It's
Yeah.
the easiest coping mechanism we can discover.
We're a creature of habit, right? So we in the path of least resistance is always the easiest. And for us, sometimes being comfortable is easy, and when we're uncomfortable, it's foreign to us, and that means it's wrong. And that's what the being able to put on the mask. That was something that I did all the time, right? I was able to put on that mask, and I could fake defunk it and say, yeah, everything was great, when clearly it wasn't. And that was a routine of mine. My routine was to say, yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, everything's okay. And I continued to it was easier to do that. As my life became more unmanageable, it was easier for me to put on that mask and hide it. Because it was more comfortable than sitting there and becoming vulnerable and saying, no, I have a problem. We need to have a serious conversation. Yet I never received the help I needed until I became uncomfortable. The help I always wanted uh, was hindered by my inability to become vulnerable, because I knew I always needed help. I knew I always needed something, but I wasn't really willing to admit it or accept it until I made that step to being uncomfortable.
You mentioned in there the idea of the help that you've always wanted, that you've always dreamed of. Now, yeah, it's difficult when we're trained and we're taught to just almost carry a John Wayne sort of mentality where it's, forget it. We're just going to do what we do, and we'll cover the Band-Aid, or we'll cover the injuries later. Then we step into the effort and the willingness to open up and talk about what's going on and discover the new tools, get the help we need. We raise our hand, essentially.
Yeah.
Walk me through that process a little bit. Was it almost like the idea of sticking a pin in a balloon and the air just pours out, it all just funnels out and you're just there? Or was it more of you held on to the idea of resisting the process?
Yeah. I think I held on to the idea where I was in denial for the longest time. I was able to fool myself that things were manageable and things were okay. That those thoughts of depression, the thoughts of doing going to very dark places was normal, right? I continued to, like you said, put a Band-Aid on that and fool myself, and then the next day was a different day, same negative thoughts, and it just continued to go until I always thought that, well, if I hit rock bottom, then I'll go get help. And I was at rock bottom for the longest time. Now looking back of how I was thinking and how I was living life, and that with that mindset, with the negativity, the depression, the negative self-talk, the worthlessness, I was at the bottom for a long time. And one of my training events that I had to go to, I knew I wasn't going to be successful if I did not get the help I needed. And I guess for me, it was the fear of failure that I had that caused me to raise my hand. And when I returned from a 30-day program, I thought I had the tools, and I thought I had the ability to handle life, because life's not slowing down for any of us. Life is going to throw significant stressors at us. Life is going to throw small stressors at us that we're going to make significantly larger than they really need to be. And my thought was, if I, eliminate alcohol from that equation, life is going to be magically better. And that wasn't the case. I was extremely, that was wrong. I thought I could do it all by myself. I thought my recovery journey could be independent. Um, and that was wrong. And that lasted for about 18 months of me being, yes, I was sober. Did I handle life stress? Did I, was the negative self-talk, the depression still there? I would argue that it probably got a little bit worse, because I didn't have the skill sets, and the way that I used to cope with them, to put that Band-Aid on, was no longer existent. I no longer was in the equation.
See, you make an important point right there that a lot of people, I feel, kind of miss, and it ends up leading to relapses, is the fact that recovery journey, number one, it never ends. Number two, it's not something that we need or should take alone. It doesn't matter if it's a professional avenue that you take, or it's, a trusted confidant, friend, family member, whatever. Building that support group is so important because there are so many other underlining factors at play. I remember being in that position in that role of a functioning alcoholic where, I would go through the day and life would be great. I'd function. And then as soon as the lights went out and it was time to put everything away, that's when it came out. It was no big deal. I never thought about what it was masking or, what the underlying issues were. And then I put down the drink, and for years I struggled with all the things that it was hiding, the depression, the anxiety, and I still felt the shame of it. So the point that I built another mask, and those same impulses and actions that cause you to crack open a can, they now express themselves in a different way. And you got to, because a lot of the time you don't see that. So it's where the support system comes in and they point that out to you. So you got to be not only open and vulnerable to the idea of, raising your hand, but open and willing to accept the feedback that comes that comes along the way.
Yes, 100%. And recovery is not easy, nor will it ever be. Right? It is a lot easier to go back and relapse and go back to those negative behaviors. It's not worth it, but I would argue that, if anything that is worth effort and hard work and determination, the reward is that much better. Right. And if we're always going to look to the easy path in our lives, we're never going to reach our true potential. And I'm not saying that you eliminate alcohol or you eliminate drugs and poof, everything is going to be better. No, I'm just saying that it's going to be a lot better than what it was. Those depression, those talks are still there. But yes, 100%. I agree with you on the community aspect. I think it's an essential part of recovery. I also believe that recovery is definitely a selfish thing. And when you have to put in the work, so you being to a community event or creating a community, you still have to participate. You still have to be vulnerable and communicate. And what I've noticed is I've always thought that my problems were so unique. Right? My problems were one of a kind. And being in, working in the recovery environment for Treehouse Recovery, I now understand that a lot of individuals have very similar problems. They go through the same, thoughts, the same feelings of depression, the same feelings of loneliness, although different, very similar. So I can relate to each person that I talk to about those because I felt the same way. So once we get that out of our own minds that our problems are the most unique and no one else has anything like ours, then we can start talking to other people and going about this problem of, this marathon of a journey of it's called recovery together. And it's going to be a lot easier.
See, I want to back up a little bit because I feel like there's a part that we're missing in the individual aspect of it is when these urges come up and we fight to either, stay away from them a little bit, we get tired, So understanding that along the journey, as you said, it's a marathon. There's times that things are going to go fast. There's times that things are going to go slow. It's going to be easy at moments. It's going to be really hard at others. And there may even be a couple of slip ups here and there. You got to learn to give yourself that grace, because one thing that especially after I dove into the reasons that I had these problems coming up, is understanding exactly that. You got to be kind to yourself. This is all a part of the process. Just because you're struggling one moment doesn't mean that you're ostracized or it's a failure. It's giving you an opportunity to look inward and uncover a little bit more strength. And that's what it is. Really is almost like the idea of tipping an hourglass upside down and watching the sand trickle down. Each grain of sand is making you a little bit stronger.
Yes. It's the grace is so critical. And being able to be willing to fail, right? I know I can't fail at one thing, and that is going back to the drink. I can't fail at that. However, I can fail at everything else. And I've taken this, and it's been extremely beneficial for me, is knowing that I can get angry. I can, lose my temper. I can overreact. I can do all these things. I can get up at 2:00 in the morning and overthink something. All these things I can do because I can learn from them, right? And it's not going to, it's going to make me stronger, and I'm going to be able to get through it. That's where I'm at in my recovery, is knowing that I cannot do that. Knowing that even though individuals do slip up, or if they make a mistake, and if we can go with the mindset of learning about that and bettering ourselves through that failure, that's the name of the game. Is not a single person has ever been successful throughout their entire life, and not a single person has learned, everything about a certain thing through success. It's oftentimes we learn from our failures. And when I started really focusing on that and started giving myself that grace, that anxiety and that depression, decreased a little bit, because I was able to get to shrug it off and say, okay, that's okay, Ben. Like, failure is all right. I'm not going to be perfect. No one in this world is. So don't put myself on to a certain standard that's unachievable.
That's one of those things that I remember holding myself to is, okay, it's time to put it down. I'm going to be perfect. I got this high standard in my head, and that is a recipe for failure. So, when you open up the door and you say, okay, I might slip up a little bit here and there, that's anticipated. Seneca left behind a really powerful quote that I apply a lot to a lot of different things. Is it's not about the defeat that is the worst thing you can ever experience. It's about the defeat that you never expected to happen that becomes the worst experience. And I feel like if you set yourself up in a position where you realize that and you accept the fact there's going to be struggles along the way. There might even be a relapse here and there. That's okay, as long as you hold it in a context of learning and of growth. Afterward, you wake up the next day and you say, oh man, I messed up last night. I really fell off the wagon. What happened before? What was it that made me end up in that situation in the first place? What cracked open the can? Was it my environment? Was it a thought that I had? Something somebody said to me triggered me? And then you're able to evaluate that one specific point. And those are the steps that get you ultimately to that goal where you're not worried about picking it up anymore because you've got it under control.
Yeah, and that's where that community comes such a critical part, right? Is being able to have that, and then that morning if a slip up happens, you just be like, I need to call somebody, right? Like, hey, this is what happened, and this is uh, there's I would almost argue that in the recovery journey, a lot of people slip up, right? And that's okay. And you're not alone on that. It's the times when you slip up and you don't communicate that and you try to tackle it yourself. That's when things start significantly increasing speed and spiraling out of control. Is okay. I slipped up. Well, that's not get back to where we were. If we're not back to where we were and we can talk to someone and get that help, then that's a victory, and that is a significant victory. I often say, not every day is a Super Bowl, right? And I think we look for these monumental accomplishments to happen, and if that happens, then we can give ourselves some credit. But if those don't happen, then we weren't successful during that day. And getting out of the bed, of taking a shower, of eating 3 meals, going to work out, if those things are something that you don't normally do and you do those things, then that's a victory. And we should start identifying these smaller victories so we can give ourselves that grace and not discredit the things that we're doing because we haven't won that Super Bowl type, accomplishment or victory.
That right there is probably with enough distance in between when I finally put the bottle down and then I dealt with things and I finally made progress in my life was the one single word that started moving the car, if you will, is celebration. And sometimes you learn that idea and that concept through conversation. For me personally, I was at a point where I was really stuck in those limiting beliefs. And it was just so happens to be a part of the podcast journey where I reached out to somebody that I admired and looked up to and never thought that the response would be, yeah, I'll come on your show and have a conversation with you. And we had this conversation structured in a way where it just naturally celebrated every little step for both he and I. And I walked away from it realizing that right there is probably the wick that lights the firework that propels you to becoming successful, being able to build a new identity that helps you to integrate back into every facet of the world in a healthy manner for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's those connections that you don't anticipate, right? And those connections that you have with someone that if you didn't open up, they would never happen, right? And now you saw the fruits of that. So now you can be like, oh, I'm going to do that more often, right? You saw the victory in that opening up. And I think that's the first hurdle that gets the ball rolling down the hill is when someone is able to open up about their journey or their struggles and someone else welcomes that and understands like, yeah, I was right there with you. I know the exact same feeling. And then that ball's rolling. It's like, okay, we're together in this. We're going to get through this together. And just having that support is amazing. And I have a big community now. However, I've structured my community to my needs, right? I just don't have a community that I'm like, okay, well, I could reach out to them whenever I need it. If I have a recovery, if I'm struggling with, cravings or stress, I have one community. If I have a community talking about, you know, my professional endeavors and where I want to go, I have another. And I'm being selfish on what communities I use to get my needs, right? I want to be selfish on that because if you have a community but you're not getting what you need, then it's your responsibility to A, find another community, or B, vocalize what your needs are so they can be met. And no one's going to do anything for you. We're going to have to do that effort or put in that effort ourselves. And that's why, life is difficult. Recovery is significantly difficult because there's still work to be done and there's still improvement. But I'm a lot better where I'm at now than where I was when I had a bottle in my hand.
You mentioned the word selfish, and it comes to mind the importance of changing the definition of selfishness. Because when you're picking up the bottle and you're going through the addiction, everybody looks at you and points the finger and says you're so selfish because you're taking yourself away from everybody around you.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a negative stigma. It becomes a negative word in our minds. So we have to learn how to change that vocabulary to where selfishness becomes empowerment within the course of the context of our journey. And a part of that, especially through my eyes and my experience, is learning how to forgive. Not only forgive the people around you, but forgiving yourself. And there's a Potawatomi story that every one of us can go to the grocery store and look at a beautiful reminder of that. Because when we go into the fruit section and we look at the strawberry, the actual story and the meaning behind that in Native American storytelling?
No, please tell me.
See, a long time ago, there were two brothers that used to get into all kinds of mischief together. And their mom told them one day not to go to the specific mountain. They did. And one of the brothers ended up dying. They got hurt and died. So the other brother had to come back and bear the shame. It was his fault. He told his parents what happened. You're faced the repercussions. And she said, don't ever go back to that spot. And he would every single day. And he would sit with the remorse and the regret that his brother was no longer there because they never listened. And one day he went back to that same spot and he sat and he noticed this little berry in the shape of a heart. And he thought about it and he thought about it. And then he heard this voice in his heart that this berry shaped like a heart represented the forgiveness from his brother. And it was inspiring him and motivating him to learn to forgive himself. So, I do the same thing every day. Every time I do go to the grocery store, I walk past and I get a little smile to myself that it's okay to forgive yourself. It's okay to let those things go. When people were pointing the finger at you that selfishness and a negative light, it's okay to forgive yourself for taking yourself away. Because everything that you were experiencing in the moment that brought the addiction forth, that was your form of coping. That was all you knew at the time. Now you're in a stage where you're climbing the staircase, developing a new vocabulary, new tools, and new abilities in order to cope with the same stressors that were triggering you back then. And I found, especially at this stage of the game, that self-forgiveness, it alleviates those feelings of depression, and it alleviates the feelings of hurting yourself in one form or another. And those are something that I shared a lot with people when I get them on the trail from the same community, because it is so empowering.
Oh yeah, it's very empowering. It's very difficult to forgive ourselves, right? And right, like I look at, going back to what you were saying is selfishness. Yeah, it is a negative word, and it can have, it can be negative, turnouts, right? If you are selfish in certain aspects. But in this aspect of recovery, it's selfishness equals, empowerment, right? And failure equals growth, and forgiveness equals grace, right? And the forgiveness aspect, ooh, that is difficult, right? It takes a long time to forgive ourselves, and we're very critical of ourselves. I remember, someone told me this a while back, is, if I heard a loved one talk to the same way I talk to myself, then there would be conflict, right? And we're so critical, and we allow ourselves to be talked to by ourselves in a tremendously negative way. And that's a door that opens up for unforgiveness and that negative self-talk. It is difficult to forgive ourselves, but if we can start forgiving ourselves on these smaller things, if we, forget our keys out when we're walking out the door, or forget to do something small, or forget to, you know, put the clothes in the dryer from the washer, or other these things that we used to get so down on ourselves. If we're able to start forgiving ourselves on these little things, well, all we're doing is attaching that courage and confidence to forgiveness. And so when we may be able to start building that up to the part where we can start forgiving ourselves on these much larger things. And then the second component is that's really, a slippery slope, and especially in recovery, is we want someone else to forgive us as quickly as possible, right? For everything that I've done in my past when I was in my addiction, there may be times that people never forgive me. And that's okay, as long as I can start working on forgiving myself and start forgiving others, right? If I can start working on forgiving others, then that gives the environment for me to start forgiving myself. But I can't expect someone to forgive me for what I've done in the past. That's on them, and I can't control anybody but myself. Although very easier said than done, right? Everything that we're talking about is very easy to say, extremely difficult to execute. But if I can talk through it with you, with anybody, about these things, then it makes it easier, right? It is not as large of a mountain to tackle when I can talk about it, compared to when I can internalize it and think about it just by myself.
I have to agree with you 110%. And, we get back to this idea that you're leaving essentially an old identity behind. You're putting something to the side and you're growing into something else. A lot of the time there's a struggle there because you can't visualize it, but it leads to those moments where they kind of feel as if they're fatal. And when you sit in that dark cloud, under that dark cloud, taking the time to remember that those layers of you are allowed to fall off, and you are allowed to shed those layers of skin. So you got to give yourself permission too, in order to do these things, is okay, because once something no longer serves you, you can let it go, and you can then freely transition into this new identity.
Yeah, it's very true. The new identity is we're constantly growing, and the future is scary. It's the fear of the unknown. All right, we don't know what the future is going to entail. But what I do know is if I continue to do the right thing and do healthy behaviors, then I'm going to be up against whatever the future brings in a much better mindset than I would be if I, continue to do unhealthy. And I always say I would, the individuals who are struggling or have struggled, think about all those times that, either A, we had no money, or B, we were sick to our stomach, or we couldn't get out of bed. And we decided to, anyways, to go get our next drink or fix. If we can tailor that same motivation, because that's in us, that's in every individual who struggles with addiction, that component doesn't leave us when we become sober. That's still a part of us. If we can tailor that and use that motivation towards something, in a positive way, we're powerful like that. The addiction mindset, the disease that we have, we can use those same characteristics and the same motivation that we once used for unhealthy means and tailor into positive. It's watch out, because the future's coming and we're going to be able to overcome whatever is thrown our way. And I use that mindset, and I continue to remind myself that I did some pretty gnarly things when I was in my addiction. Well, guess what? Now I can do some pretty gnarly things when I'm not in my addiction for a positive way.
And that's one of the most important aspects when you're integrating this new personality into yourself, is realizing that the remorse, you can leave behind. You can let that go, because what you gained out of all that time is a skill set. It's a very unique skill set that can be tailored and can be shifted and molded into whatever this reality is going to be, that this new identity of yourself is going to traverse. And the cool and exciting part of that process is that new reality, or that new chapter of the book, is not written. You got the pen in your hand now. You get to make that whatever it is you decide you want it to be.
Yeah. And that's awesome. That's very, powerful and empowering to any individual that is able to think like that. Right. And then, I say I think about that often, but do I say that that's always, my thought process, or do I always, handle life stressors as, okay, well, guess what? I used to do this and now I can overcome that. No, I definitely don't. However, when I, take myself away from that situation and allow my emotions to calm down and actually reflect on whatever's happening, that's when I can actually give it some thought and give it like, does this require my attention, or am I being emotionally charged by this situation? And will this really matter in a couple months? I've always heard that, look at it as, if it's going to matter in 5 years, then it's going to be important. Well, I say, okay, well, if it's going to matter in a couple months, then okay, I'll give this some attention. If not, maybe try to let it go. Well, again, a lot easier said than done. That's where, those skills and those coping mechanisms come into place to get yourself out of that headspace, to redirect your brain into thinking about something else and something healthier than continuing to spiral.
And this is where these mindful practices sort of creep their way into the web, and they become tools that we craft all these different techniques and abilities off of. So it's very fundamental and very important in order to get in touch with yourself, because just as much, and this is just as much a healing journey as it is a recovery journey.
Yes, absolutely. I'm healing, as my recovery time increases, I'm able to heal and move further away from those negative feelings, right? I as more positive memories are remembered in my brain, it's like the conveyor belt where I continue to create positive memories. Well, those negative ones are going to fall off eventually, right? And I'm continuing to, as time increases, those I get further and further in my rearview mirror from my past, and they get smaller and smaller. Although, yes, they're still very important, and they still created the person I am now. I don't put as much thought and worry in those because I'm able to continue to create those positive memories.
And that's what this is all about. If you want a quality of life that speaks to those positive memories, those enjoyable memories that you can be able to look back on and share as you get further and further down the trail of life, you got to go out and you got to actively get it.
Mm-hmm. Nothing's going to be given to us, and I would argue that nothing worth it is going to be easier given to you, and so you're going to have to go make it work. If you've tried something and it doesn't work, okay, try something else. These monumental individuals, like the individuals who, the Elon Musks in the world or the Bill Gates in the world, these people who've changed society, guarantee that they didn't just wake up one morning and poof, they've had this magical, this skill. They continue to try, they failed, and they're like, okay, well, what can I learn from this and what can I tweak it to do next time better? And if I can just move that needle, some days I'll move a couple feet, some days I'll move an inch, and a couple days I'll move back an inch, right? And that's okay, because I know that if I look at it at a week span or a month, that I've made progress, and progress is the name of the game, in all endeavors, but especially in recovery.
Absolutely. Well, our time's coming to an end, unfortunately, because this has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. Before I let you go, you got to let people know how they can get in touch with you, how they can get the ball rolling to do some work to improve themselves and get on one of these journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for Treehouse Recovery. So it's a substance abuse and mental health facility that pairs physical fitness, knowledge, and community to heal the brain. We understand it's an unhealthy life behavior, but we can help change that to instill some healthy behaviors. I'm also a mental health and recovery mediator on Nick Lavery's website. It's called Team Machine Forge. And this is just another community that you can have at your fingertips. A lot of knowledge on various different empowering improvements within the Forge. And then lastly, if you feel the one-on-one is more ideal, and you need the confidentiality, I have a coaching business. It's called resilience-reconnaissance.com. It's a more isolated one-on-one. You and I will share Zoom calls, FaceTime, phone calls, texts, whatever we can do to help you. So there's definitely different levels of care. But at the end of the day, if you want to change your life, then there's things out there to help you. You're the one that needs to make that first step, and then others will walk along with you.
That's beautifully said. The moniker that I use is every journey begins one step at a time.
Yes.
And when you're willing to take that first step, everything else comes together. When it comes down to it, it's a scary process. You don't need to know. You just walk. You let it happen.
Yeah, exactly. That first step is the hardest. And then once that that momentum goes, then it gets a little bit easier, and then before you know it, you're running, and you can look in that rear view mirror and be like, that's the old me, and now look at the new me and be happy, and yeah, it's a great feeling. It's effort. That takes a lot of effort, but it's definitely worth it.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate the vulnerability. This has been a beautiful conversation. I'm sure is going to inspire somebody to take that first step. I look forward to reconnecting with you again, figuring out, just touching base and building on this or anything.
Absolutely, Mike. I would love that. Well, we'll just definitely keep in contact over email, and then I'll continue to move forward.
Most definitely. So this portion of Project Mindfully Outdoors is brought to you by Ben Monnette. Now, you know that they're much more than just friends to me. They're the place that I go when I'm looking for my first aid needs. I've got a pack on every single one of my backpacks. I've got one in the truck. I've got one around the house. Because my motto is their motto. Get prepared now so that you can survive later. But what's really special and sets my life apart is that they don't just blindly throw you these first aid packs. They've gone and put together a fully interactive training course to prepare you for when you need to use them. That's mymedic.com, promo code Project Outdoors 15. That way you're saving 15% on those life-saving tools. mymedic.com, code Mindfully Project Outdoors 15. That's it. That's all. That's the end. We've reached the end of yet another beautiful conversation and episode of Project Mindfully Outdoors. I would love to take a second, however, and talk about something very important, because I warned you early on in the beginning of this episode, we were getting knee deep in the muck, and that this was going to be a conversation that everybody could relate to. So let me address the elephant in the room. If you're right here, right now, in the muck up to your shoulders, listen, there is hope. There's always a way. So keep on fighting, and don't be afraid. And most important, don't hold on to those self-inflicted feelings of shame, because it's going to be okay. All you got to do is put in the work. And take today's episode as an invitation to begin that climb. Now listen to one more thing before I let you go. If you want to check out this conversation video for today's episode, along with all the other campfire sessions, hit us up on YouTube by searching up Project Mindfully Outdoors. Make sure you subscribe while you're there. Until next time, my friend, get out there in the wilderness, through the stillness, and you adventure live. See ya.